In a quiet little town in Ohio, where cornfields stretched as far as the eye could see and Friday night football was the highlight of the week, lived a 16-year-old boy named Ethan Miller. On the surface, Ethan looked like any other American teenager. Tall, a little lanky, with a mop of sandy blonde hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes. His teachers often described him as bright but distracted. His parents, on the other hand, had a much sharper phrase. He's wasting his potential. Ethan wasn't lazy. In fact, he often dreamed big. He wanted to win a scholarship, go to college out of state, and one day become an engineer who designed things that mattered. The problem was never his ambition. It was his focus. The boy simply could not sit still. Whenever he opened a math textbook, within 5 minutes he would be scrolling through TikTok. If he tried to start his English essay, he'd get sidetracked by an NBA highlights reel on YouTube. His mind bounced from one thought to another like a pinball machine, buzzing, flashing, never quiet long enough to concentrate. His teachers began to notice the decline. Grades that were once solid B's slipped into C's and even D's. His mom grew frustrated watching him spend hours hunched over a screen, while his dad shook his head and muttered about wasted talent. Ethan himself knew he was slipping, but every time he promised himself, "Tomorrow I'll do better," tomorrow came and nothing changed. One night at the dinner table, his father, Mr. Miller, put down his fork and looked Ethan in the eye. "Son," he said firmly, "your mind is like a wild horse. If you don't train it, it'll run you straight off a cliff." Ethan rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath that it was just homework, not life or death. But deep down, his father's words struck a nerve. Because Ethan did feel like something was dragging him, faster and faster, toward a place he didn't want to go. He went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, earbuds still buzzing with background noise, wondering if maybe his father was right. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The turning point came a few days later, when Mr. Miller decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove Ethan across town to the old high school gymnasium, a place Ethan rarely visited since he wasn't much into sports. Inside, waiting with a firm handshake and a commanding presence, stood Coach Harris. Coach Harris was a retired basketball coach, a local legend known for molding restless teenagers into disciplined athletes. His hair was silver, his voice gravelly, and his handshake strong enough to make Ethan wince. Though he no longer paced the sidelines during Friday night games, everyone in town knew he still carried the wisdom of decades on the court. Ethan felt uneasy. "Why am I here?" he wondered. "What does basketball have to do with my grades?" But one look at his father, who stood with crossed arms and an expression that said, "Pay attention," told Ethan that there would be no easy escape. Coach Harris smiled slightly, as if he had seen boys like Ethan 100 times before. "Your dad tells me you've got brains but no focus," he said. "Well, let's find out." And with that, Ethan's journey was about to begin. The Saturday morning after that tense dinner conversation, Mr. Miller decided that words alone weren't going to save his son. He had tried lectures, he had tried threats, he had even tried bribes. Nothing had worked. So he drove Ethan across town in silence, the kind of silence that made Ethan sink into his seat and stare out the window, wishing he had stayed in bed. They pulled up to the old brick building of Westfield High's gymnasium, the paint peeling around the edges, the doors worn from decades of use. Ethan recognized the place. It was where the state champion basketball team had once practiced. He also remembered that his father had played there back in the 80s, before life, family, and responsibility set in. "Why are we here?" Ethan muttered as they stepped out of the car. "You'll see," Mr. Miller replied, his voice low but steady. Inside the gym, the smell of varnished wood and old sweat filled the air. The bleachers were empty, the court polished but scarred from thousands of games. Standing at center court was Coach Harris, a man Ethan had heard about but never met. Coach Harris was in his late 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair cropped short and a pair of sharp blue eyes that seemed to look straight through you. Even in retirement, he carried himself like a man who had spent his life commanding respect. He extended a hand, and Ethan reluctantly shook it. The grip was firm, too firm. Ethan tried to pull away, but Coach didn't let go right away. Instead, he locked eyes with the teenager and said, "Your father tells me you're smart, smarter than most, but you can't sit still long enough to use it. Is that true?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I guess," he muttered. "You guess?" Coach raised an eyebrow. "Son, you either are or you aren't." "Which is it?" I get distracted," Ethan admitted, his voice low. Coach finally released his hand and gave a small nod. "That's the first honest thing you've said. Good. Honesty is where discipline begins." Mr. Miller crossed his arms and watched silently. Ethan could feel his father's gaze boring into the back of his neck. He hated this. He hated being cornered. But there was something about Coach Harris that made him bite back his usual sarcastic comments. Coach Harris walked slowly toward the edge of the court and picked up a paper cup from a nearby table. He filled it from a soda bottle, right up to the brim. The liquid fizzed, threatening to spill over. He carried it carefully back and handed it to Ethan. "Here's your first test," Coach said simply. "Walk across this gym and back without spilling a drop." Ethan blinked. "That's it? You dragged me out here for this?" Coach's eyes narrowed. "Do it." The gym felt enormous as Ethan stood there holding the cup. He took a step forward, then another. At first, it seemed easy, but as he reached the halfway point, Coach clapped his hands loudly, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Ethan jumped, and soda sloshed over the side. "Keep going," Coach barked. From the sidelines, Mr. Miller picked up a basketball and bounced it hard against the floor. The echo rattled through the gym. Ethan's hand shook. A few more drops spilled. By the time he returned to Coach, nearly half the soda was gone. He set the cup down, cheeks burning. "That was stupid," he muttered. Coach folded his arms. "No, that was life." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Coach leaned in. "That soda is your goal, college, career, whatever you want. The gym is the world. Distractions are everywhere. Noise, pressure, people who want your attention. Every time you look away from what matters, you spill some of your future. You keep doing that, and one day you'll come back with nothing left in the cup." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He thought of all the times he had wasted hours scrolling on his phone, all the assignments he had half finished, all the promises he had broken to himself. For the first time, it felt like someone had put his problem into something he could see, touch, and feel. Mr. Miller stepped forward then, his voice low but carrying weight. "Son, I've been telling you this for years, but sometimes you need to hear it from someone who isn't your dad." Ethan looked down at the half-empty cup, the soda still fizzing, bubbles rising and bursting at the surface. His chest tightened. He didn't want to admit it, but the metaphor made sense. Coach Harris clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't beat yourself up. Everyone spills at first. The question is, do you want to learn to carry it steady?" Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to shrug it off, laugh, and walk away. But another part, deep inside, knew that this was his chance to change. He looked up, meeting Coach's eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "I want to learn." Coach smiled for the first time. "Good, then let's get to work." The gym was quiet again, except for the soft fizzing of the soda in Ethan's half-empty cup. He stared at it for a long moment, his mind spinning. It was such a simple exercise. Walk across a room. And yet, he had failed. The realization stung. Coach Harris studied him carefully, his arms crossed over his chest. "You think you're the only one?" he asked after a pause. "Every kid I ever coached struggled with this. Some couldn't stay calm under the pressure of a full gym screaming at them. Others couldn't even pay attention in practice because their minds were 1,000 miles away. The difference between the ones who succeeded and the ones who didn't was discipline, plain and simple." Ethan felt his ears burning. He didn't want to be lectured. He wanted to defend himself, to say that this was stupid, that it had nothing to do with his life. But deep down, he couldn't ignore how true it felt. Coach bent down, picked up the cup, and refilled it to the brim again. He held it steady, then placed it back in Ethan's hands. "Again." Ethan frowned. "Seriously?" "Yes," Coach replied firmly. But this time, ignore everything but the cup. Ethan sighed and started walking again. His steps were slower, his eyes locked on the rim of the soda. He could hear every creak of the gym floor, every echo of his sneakers. It was working, until Mr. Miller coughed loudly from the bleachers. Ethan's focus broke for a second, and a few drops spilled. "Keep walking," Coach barked. Ethan gritted his teeth and forced himself forward. The gym suddenly felt alive with distractions. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the squeak of the backboard, even the faint buzz of a fly circling above him. Every sound clawed at his attention, begging him to look up. He wanted to shout, "This is impossible!" But instead, he pressed on. When he finally returned to Coach, the soda was still mostly full, though a thin line of sticky liquid clung to the outside of the cup. Ethan's arms ached from holding it so stiffly. Coach nodded. "Better, but not good enough. You see, the world doesn't stop just because you have a goal. It gets louder, it tests you. And if you can't tune it out, you'll lose everything that matters before you even realize it." Ethan set the cup down, his chest rising and falling. "So what do I do?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Coach's eyes softened. "You train your mind the same way an athlete trains his body. Repetition, consistency. You keep walking with that cup until your hands don't shake, until nothing around you matters more than what's inside. That's how you win, whether it's basketball, academics, or life." The words sank into Ethan like weights pressing down on his shoulders. He thought of his unfinished assignments, his endless screen time, the way he always told himself he'd start tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. He realized, maybe for the first time, that his life was already half-spilled soda. He glanced at his dad, who sat quietly on the bleachers. For once, there was no lecture, no sigh of disappointment. Just a steady, hopeful gaze. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility. Coach placed a hand on his shoulder. "Discipline doesn't just happen. You build it, one choice at a time. You ready to start building?" Ethan nodded, slowly at first, then with more conviction. "Yeah, I'm ready." Coach smiled faintly. "Good, then this cup just became your reminder. Every time you're tempted to look away from what matters, picture it. You spill your focus, you spill your future. Keep it steady, and you can carry anything you want in life." For the rest of that morning, Ethan practiced. Again and again, he walked the length of the gym with the soda in hand. Sometimes he spilled a little, sometimes a lot. But each time, he grew more determined. His dad even joined in, clapping, bouncing the ball, whistling loudly, throwing distractions his way. And with each lap, Ethan got better at tuning it all out. By the time the session ended, his shirt was damp with sweat, and his arms trembled with exhaustion. But the final cup of soda sat nearly untouched, tiny bubbles still rising to the surface. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something new stirring inside him: pride. As they left the gym, Coach called after him. "Remember, Ethan, the world will always try to spill your cup. Don't let it." Those words echoed in his head all the way home, mingling with the memory of the soda sloshing dangerously close to the edge. He didn't know it yet, but that lesson would shape everything that came next. That night, Ethan sat at his desk with a notebook open in front of him. For once, he wasn't scrolling on his phone or clicking through videos. Instead, he was staring at the blank page, trying to decide what to do first. The memory of the soda cup lingered in his mind. He could still feel the cold plastic pressing into his palm, the sticky drops sliding down his fingers when he lost focus. He wrote at the top of the page, "How to train my mind." The first step, he decided, was simple: limit distractions. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to the settings, and turned on the screen time limit feature. 2 hours for social media. That was it. A notification popped up warning him that most people turn this feature off within days. He almost laughed. "Yeah, that'll probably be me," he thought. But he forced himself to hit confirm. The next morning, he tried something new. Instead of rolling out of bed at the last minute and rushing to school half awake, he set his alarm 30 minutes earlier. The first attempt was miserable. He hit snooze 3 times before dragging himself up, and when he finally stumbled into the kitchen, his dad just raised an eyebrow. "Training the wild horse?" Mr. Miller asked, sipping his coffee. Ethan groaned but didn't answer. He grabbed a bowl of cereal and told himself tomorrow would be better. The second step came from something Coach Harris had mentioned: meditation. Ethan had always pictured meditation as sitting cross-legged on a mountain, humming in silence, something way too weird for him. But he downloaded a simple app, put in his earbuds, and tried 5 minutes of guided breathing. It was awful. His legs itched, his mind raced, and after 90 seconds he was thinking about pizza. But he forced himself to finish. When the timer beeped, he ripped out the earbuds and muttered, "That was pointless." Still, the next morning, he tried again. This time, he made it 3 minutes before his thoughts wandered. By the end of the week, he managed 5 minutes without completely losing focus. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. At school, Ethan also tried a new study technique he had read about: Pomodoro sessions. 25 minutes of focused work, followed by a 5-minute break. At first, it felt silly. He kept glancing at the timer, waiting for the break. But slowly, he realized he could actually get through a whole chapter of history or finish his math homework in one session. That was more than he had done in weeks. Of course, it wasn't all victories. There were nights when he broke his screen time rule, binging videos until midnight. There were mornings when he hit snooze 5 times and skipped meditation altogether. More than once, he slammed his notebook shut in frustration, convinced that he wasn't built for discipline. But every time he felt like quitting, he pictured the soda cup in his hands, the fizzing, the sloshing, the way it nearly spilled over when he looked away. And he remembered Coach Harris's words: "You spill your focus, you spill your future." Little by little, the changes began to stick. After a month, his math teacher pulled him aside. "Ethan, I've noticed your homework is actually complete these days. Nice work." The praise shocked him. He mumbled a thank you, but inside a spark of pride flickered. 2 months later, his English essay came back with an A and a handwritten note that, "This is your best work yet." His mom taped it to the fridge, and for once, Ethan didn't roll his eyes. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was getting somewhere. By spring, Ethan was unrecognizable to his classmates. He sat closer to the front, raised his hand in discussions, and even started helping friends study. The phone still tempted him. The noise of the world still tugged at him. But now he had tools. He could steady the cup. One afternoon, while walking home, Ethan stopped at a gas station and bought a bottle of soda. He poured it into a cup, filled it to the brim, and walked slowly down the quiet sidewalk. People stared. A couple of kids laughed, but Ethan didn't care. He walked the entire block without spilling a drop. When he reached his driveway, he lifted the cup, smiling at the bubbles dancing at the surface. "Not bad," he whispered to himself. His dad came out of the house just in time to see him. "Practicing?" Ethan held up the cup proudly. "Yeah, and I didn't spill." For the first time, Mr. Miller's smile wasn't tired or skeptical. It was proud. "That's my boy." Ethan didn't say anything, but deep inside he felt it too. Change was happening. Not overnight, not all at once, but piece by piece. And with each small victory, the wild horse inside him was learning to be tamed. By the time fall rolled around, Ethan's transformation was no longer just noticeable. It was undeniable. His grades had climbed, his confidence had sharpened, and his teachers began nominating him for something he had never even considered before: the Ohio State Academic Decathlon. It was the kind of competition where the brightest students from across the state gathered to solve complex problems under a ticking clock. Teams trained for months, memorizing facts, tackling logic puzzles, and practicing presentations. For Ethan, it was terrifying. A year ago, he couldn't even finish his homework without checking his phone. Now, people actually believed he could compete against the best. Coach Harris pulled him aside one evening after practice. "This is your shot, son," he said, his gravelly voice echoing in the empty gym. "But remember, competitions like these are chaos. Kids panic, pressure builds. If you lose your discipline, you'll drown in it. Keep your cup steady." The words echoed in Ethan's head as the day of the decathlon arrived. The competition was held at a sprawling university campus, with banners flying and nervous students in matching blazers clutching notebooks. Ethan's team filed into the auditorium, where the first round of questions would be projected onto giant screens. A large digital clock above the stage ticked down, glowing red, 30 Hundhao. As the moderator explained the rules, Ethan scanned the room. Some students whispered furiously with their teammates. Others sat stiff with fear. The air was thick with tension, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. When the first round began, chaos erupted. Questions flashed on the screen, fast and merciless. Solve for X in this equation. Identify the historical significance of the Treaty of Ghent. Pens scratched furiously, calculators beeped, papers rustled. Ethan's heart pounded. His hands trembled slightly as he scribbled down his answers. Around him, students muttered in frustration. One boy slammed his pencil down so hard it broke. A girl on the far side of the room put her head in her hands, already overwhelmed. The clock ticked down, 25 Ashi, 24:59, 24:58. Panic whispered at the edges of Ethan's mind. You'll never finish. This is too much. You're not smart enough. And then, just as his breathing quickened, he pictured it. The soda cup. Brim full, trembling in his hands. He could almost hear Coach Harris's voice. Ignore the noise. Focus on the cup. Ethan closed his eyes for 2 seconds, inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. When he opened them again, the panic had faded. His pen steadied. One question at a time. That was the rule. He attacked the problems methodically. History, math, literature. Step by step, answer by answer. The chaos around him blurred into background noise. Students coughed, chairs squeaked, papers fluttered, but Ethan didn't look up once. By the halfway mark, his team had surged ahead. Ethan barely noticed. He was locked in, pouring every ounce of focus into keeping the cup steady. Then came the final round. Logic puzzles under a brutal time crunch, the kind designed to break even the best students. The moderator's voice boomed, "You have 5 minutes." The first puzzle stumped nearly everyone. Teams whispered frantically, crossing out answers, starting over. Ethan felt the pressure mount. His teammates glanced at him, eyes wide with desperation. He took another breath, remembering the fizz of soda bubbling at the rim. Steady hands, steady mind. He broke the problem into pieces, ignoring the panic. Numbers lined up. Symbols clicked into place, and suddenly the answer revealed itself. "Got it," he whispered, sliding the paper to his teammate. Relief washed over their faces as they scribbled it down. The clock glared 0:30, 0:29, 0:28. The final puzzle appeared. The room buzzed with frantic whispers. Ethan's chest tightened. This one was brutal. He glanced at the clock again. 20 seconds. He closed his eyes. Don't rush. Don't spill. Focus. Images of late nights studying, of walking the sidewalk with soda in his hand, of Coach Harris's steady gaze. All of it crashed through his mind in an instant. His pen flew across the page. 10 seconds left. 9, 8. He circled the final answer and slammed his pencil down. The buzzer blared. Time was up. The room erupted with groans, sighs, and nervous chatter. Students slumped in their seats, some in tears. Ethan's team exchanged looks of disbelief. They had actually finished. When the scores were tallied, the announcer stepped forward with a wide smile. And the winner of this year's Ohio State Academic Decathlon, Westfield High. The auditorium shook with applause. Ethan's teammates jumped to their feet, hugging each other, shouting in triumph. His parents stood in the crowd, his mother wiping away tears, his father clapping harder than anyone. But Ethan barely heard it. He sat still for a moment, staring at his empty hands as if he could still feel the weight of the soda cup there. He realized he had carried it the whole time, not literally, but in his mind. And for the first time, not a single drop had spilled. He stood then, letting the cheers wash over him. For once, he didn't feel like the distracted boy who couldn't finish his homework. He felt like someone who had trained his wild horse and learned to ride it, someone who had discovered the power of discipline. And as he walked up to accept the trophy, Coach Harris's proud smile from the back of the room told him the journey was only beginning. The night after the competition, Ethan sat alone in his bedroom, the golden trophy resting on his desk beside his notebooks. It gleamed in the lamplight, tall and proud, a physical reminder of something far more important than a medal or a title. He picked it up, running his fingers over the engraved words. Ohio State Academic Decathlon, champion. A year ago, those words would have sounded like a joke. A year ago, he couldn't sit still for 10 minutes without wandering into the endless maze of distractions. And yet here it was, proof that he had carried his cup steady. Downstairs, his parents were still celebrating. His mom had baked a pie, his dad had invited neighbors over, and the house buzzed with laughter. But Ethan had slipped away, needing a quiet moment to himself. As he stared at the trophy, he thought of Coach Harris. He remembered the first day in the gym, the fizzing soda, the embarrassment of spilling half of it before even making it back. That humiliation had burned, but it had also planted a seed. One that had grown through late-night study sessions, early morning alarms, and countless moments when he wanted to quit. His phone buzzed on the desk, a text from Coach Harris. Proud of you. Remember, discipline doesn't replace intelligence. It makes it unstoppable. Ethan smiled, feeling his chest tighten with emotion. That single sentence summed up everything he had learned. Talent wasn't enough. Intelligence wasn't enough. Even luck wasn't enough. Without discipline, all of it spilled away like soda on the gym floor. He set the trophy back down and pulled out his journal. On the first page, still there in shaky handwriting, were the words he had scrawled nearly a year ago. How to train my mind. He flipped to a fresh page and began writing. Wake up at 6:30, no excuses. Meditate 5 minutes. Study in sessions, not marathons. Screen time cap 2 hours. Remember the cup, always. As the ink flowed, he realized this wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The discipline that had carried him through the decathlon would need to carry him through college, through his career, through every challenge life threw his way. He thought of the kids in his town, the ones glued to their phones, the ones who laughed at him when he walked down the sidewalk balancing soda. Maybe, just maybe, his story could show them something different. That discipline wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about restriction. It was about freedom. The freedom to focus, to achieve, to become more than what you were yesterday. Later that week, the school held a small ceremony to honor the team. Parents clapped, teachers congratulated them, and when Ethan's name was called, the principal asked if he wanted to say a few words. Standing at the podium, Ethan looked out over the crowd. For a moment, the old nerves returned. But then he pictured the soda cup again, brimming at the edge. He steadied himself. I used to think intelligence was everything, he began. That if you were smart enough, you didn't need anything else. But I learned that intelligence without discipline is like carrying a cup with holes. It doesn't matter how much you pour in, it'll all leak out. Discipline is what makes your talent count. Discipline is what turns potential into reality. The room fell silent. Students leaned forward, teachers nodded, and his parents beamed from the front row. Ethan's voice grew stronger. I'm not the smartest kid in this room, but I learned to keep my cup steady, and if I can do it, anyone can. When he stepped down, the applause was thunderous. But more important than the clapping was the look on the faces of younger students. Eyes wide, thoughtful, inspired. That evening, Ethan found himself back at the gym. Coach Harris was there, waiting as though he knew Ethan would come. They sat on the bleachers together, the smell of varnished wood and the echo of distant memories hanging in the air. Feels different now, doesn't it? Coach said, his voice low. Ethan nodded. It does, and it feels like this is just the start. Coach smiled. That's because it is. Discipline isn't a finish line. It's a way of walking through life. Some days you'll spill a little, some days you'll carry it steady. But the point is, you keep walking. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stared at the empty court, imagining himself crossing it again with the cup in his hand. Only this time, he knew he could keep it full. And in that quiet gym, beneath the dim lights and faded banners, Ethan Miller, once the boy who couldn't finish his homework, felt certain of one thing. He had mastered his mind. And that mastery, he realized, was the greatest victory of all.